Bassem AwadAllah is a very familiar face here in Jordan, but also in the region, worked in the royal court in terms of the early stages of economic policy, 1999 and beyond. This economy is growing 6 to 7%, and you kind of felt the momentum of Jordan. And I can even recall a number of people willing to put money into Syria because they saw the opportunity of the market. Then we've had gigantic dislocation over the last 5 years. Now, His Majesty has suggested we'd like to get to 7.5%, and during our interview yesterday I said, is that bar a little bit too high? He says, let's not forget we were growing 7% before the global financial crisis. Concretely though, Bassem, what are the ingredients to sustain 6 to 7% growth in Jordan at this stage?
Well, John, just to keep it in perspective, obviously the political situation has cast its shadow. I mean, the revolts, the continued instability, the deep change that has taken place in Syria and Iraq. These are historically the two major trading partners for Jordan, remember, as well as what's happening in Egypt, Libya, Sudan, and Tunis, and also Yemen. This is rendering the future of the region increasingly bleak. And together with the stalemate on the Palestinian-Israeli front as well. I mean, that has put enormous pressure on Jordan. I think the two major economic aspects, the two major economic results that have come out of this regional situation, one is the hosting of 1.3 million refugees, Syrian refugees in Jordan. This is equivalent to 20% of Jordan's population. And out of a funding necessity of a funding appeal of $1.2 billion, only $195 million has been received. That's 16% of the total funding appeal. So you can imagine what the pressure is on the government. The second result is the massive increase in the subsidies for the electricity as a result of the shift from the natural gas to heavy fuel oil. With that alone, I mean, as a result of the halting of the Egyptian natural gas supplies, that alone has accounted for half of the national debt since 2011. So today's debt is almost 90% of GDP. This was 60% of GDP back in 2008. So you have a very bleak regional picture. Despite all of this, the International Monetary Fund, only a month ago, on the 24th of April, comes out with a statement after its sixth review of Jordan's 3-year economic program, and states, and I quote what the IMF is saying, that Jordan is still persevering within a very difficult regional environment, that it continues to face burdens, social and economic burdens on its economy because of the conflict in the neighboring countries and because of the hosting of refugees. This has affected also the external and the fiscal balance. Nonetheless, the IMF report continues, Jordan is showing growth. Growth is actually accelerating. Inflation is low. And the external and fiscal balances are gradually strengthening. And the banking sector is actually sound. End of the quotation of the IMF. Now, coming from the IMF, this is not bad. This is a very good report about what the government is doing and about where Jordan is faring. And really, it is no accident, this resilience and stability of this country. I think it speaks volumes about the leadership of this country. It speaks volumes about the people of this country. It speaks volumes about the economy of this country. Remember, this country has gone through 2.5 decades of reforms, particularly since 1999, and you mentioned the start of 1999. The reforms that have taken place in Jordan are very deep. And many of them maybe were not continued to their full extent. Many of them were not holistic, taken in their holistic approach. But even with that, they really provided a shield for the Jordanian economy when the times became rough, and we are all still living in these rough times. And you can see that this is the case today, when Jordan has been sheltered and resilient, and everybody's speaking about the resilience of the Jordanian economy. Second factor is that Jordan's big asset is its young and educated people. And this is something that is really a big asset which is not there in many, many countries around the world. We do have an advanced infrastructure, and we do have, obviously, a very strategic location. This has helped Jordan. Remember that also foreign investment is part of our economy. 90%, the foreign stock of investment constitutes 90% of our GDP. Today, 50% of the companies listed on the Amman's financial market are actually owned by foreigners, both at the individual level and at the institutional level. So this really shows you that there is a deep knowledge of foreign investment and how foreign investment can actually affect Jordan and promote growth and sustain growth in the medium and long terms. So I'm sorry I'm taking a lot of time, but maybe
No.
if you just give me an additional minute.
You'll hear from me if I think it's going on too.
Jordan obviously is a member of the WTO. It has access to over 1 billion customers worldwide. And at the end of the day, Jordan's dynamic sectors like the IT have proven that they really can create jobs for Jordanians. This is all on the positive side, and this explains the resilience of the economy. But having said all of this, we all know that foreign investors are still shy. The regional situation, the political situation in the region is really reducing the appetite for foreign investment in this country and in the region as a whole. And I think this is the question that needs to be raised. I think this is the question that is on the minds of everybody in this hall, saying that there is a very difficult regional political situation. There is a resilient Jordanian economy. The Jordanian economy is making a turnaround finally. How do we sustain that? How do we accelerate that? How do we actually relaunch the economy of Jordan? I think this is where we really need to discuss. And part of the discussion should really focus about countries that have looked at unconventional, extraordinary measures in distressed times. Remember, Saudi Arabia spent 20% of its GDP in 2009 as a fiscal stimulus. The United States spent 6% of its GDP in 2009 as a fiscal stimulus. China spent 5% of its spending in order to expand its economy back in 2009. You have many other countries actually that have looked at the monetary stimulus. The Federal Reserve in the United States increased its balance sheet by 20% since 2008. So really, we really need to think out of the box. I think in the case of Jordan, coming back to Jordan, what needs to be done? I think the government is doing a very good job at focusing at the macroeconomy, at focusing at macroeconomic stability, at focusing also at regulatory reforms and public services. A few days ago, as you said, they issued the 2025 vision. And I think they really are concentrating as well on investment in major sectors, in energy, in water, in infrastructure, urban development. This $20 billion package, I think, is a very important thing. Having said this, this is necessary. This is very important what the government is doing. But I think in and of itself, it's not enough to actually boost the growth and achieve what His Majesty wants in terms of 6% and 7%. Remember, we need to create 400,000 new jobs in the next 7 years. And this requires at least 6% real growth in the economy. In the Gulf region today, we have 600,000 Jordanians. Now, the Gulf is not going to be able to take more Jordanians over the next few years. So we really need to concentrate on our economy here. So I think what we need to do is to emphasize, in addition to what the government is doing, we need to emphasize two other ingredients. One is the human resource development, by looking not only at the numbers, by looking at the quality of education. We really need to support entrepreneurship, and we need to support innovation in terms of our focus on human resource development. The other thing is SMEs, and that's the last thing I will say. SMEs, as you said, this is a core of the economy of Jordan. We have 100,000 SMEs in Jordan. They represent 97% of the companies, of the total companies registered in Jordan. They provide 60% of the jobs for the total workforce and 70% of all new entrants in the market. SMEs account for 45% of our exports in Jordan. So this is really what we really need to concentrate on, funding for SMEs. You have to look at private equity funding for SMEs, which really is significantly low at the current levels that we are talking about. If you give me a chance later on, I would like to just come up with another proposal about public-private partnership if I have the time.
Good, and I'd like to also bring in Sursuma afterwards about youth unemployment. We've talked about it for 10 years, and you couldn't suggest that this economy is not reforming, and there's a lot of examples in the region who are pushing the traditional economic reforms, but the birth rate is growing faster than the job creation, and this is which creates problems. Opportunities, of course, because it's a young workforce, but also the challenges of finding them the right jobs and getting the right education mix, as you were suggesting. Bassem AwadAllah, to share some of our past together. In 2007, I think it was, we had a dinner in Dubai, and you were incredibly pessimistic about the region at the time. You thought there was going to be trouble on the horizon, and lo and behold, it unfolded before our eyes 3.5 years later. What's your view today in terms of the amount of dislocation we're seeing, and do we have to go down deeper to have further dislocation before we find a bottom? And what happens to the youth unemployment in this sort of environment, which festers into more unhappiness, more dislocation, more radicalism? Where do we go?
Well, In 2007, as now, I think the issue is about youth, it's about unemployment, it's about economics. Yes, the politics in the region have been very complex for many, many years, since at least 1948. That has not stopped Jordan from growing or other countries from growing. But I think it's economics. I think it's economics at the end of the day. And I think that we really need to assume the responsibility, all of us, whether in governments or private sector or NGOs or civil society. I think these are not ordinary times. These are extraordinary times, and they require extraordinary solutions. Whether we speak about Egypt or we speak about Jordan, we have come out of financial distress, let's face it. Like other countries have come out of financial distress because of the economic crisis, we have come out of financial distress because of political reasons, because of the regional externalities. And I think we need to really think very creatively. I think what needs to be done, and I cannot see any other way, except for a new public-private cross-border partnership to be built. And I mean by that, you need to have foreign governments included, you need to have the international financial institutions included, you need to have the international institutional investors, both international and local, involved, and you have to have the private sector, international and private, involved. I think there are 4 stakeholders in this, and they need to come together in order to make sure that they identify what are the projects that can be really done, to look at the projects, to look at the sectors, what will make a difference to people. This, of course, needs to be taken to look at the strategic sectors, at energy, at water, at urban development, but they also need to look at high-impact investments, investments which are going to make a difference now, not 4 years from now. I don't think anybody, the Jordanian people or the Egyptian people or anybody in this region, are going to be happy if you actually achieve results for them 4 years from now. They want results now. I mean, I know His Majesty wants results tomorrow, but I mean, the people also, they want results in the next year. And you really need to actually achieve that. You have to do that. You have to identify what are the new industries, biotech, pharmaceuticals. How do you harness all this youth? How do you actually create out of the SMEs a real core for the economy? It will not happen just by grants from GCC countries. It will not happen just by government policies. All the government policies are needed. But the government is good at identifying projects. The private sector needs to come. The international financial institutions need to come. And foreign governments need to look at how this public-private partnership, the new paradigm model for development for the Middle East, needs to be sustained. That is the only way, in my view, that we can accelerate, we can sustain, and we can relaunch the economy in Jordan and elsewhere.
Final comments from Bassem, and then we'll wrap up the panel. Very quickly, if you can, please.
2 points. I think the European example here is very telling. When the European Union started, it actually started in 1958 with the Treaty of Rome, and then you had an expansion. And the rich countries actually invested in the poorer countries and helped their economies to actually graduate and to grow and to spur growth in all of these economies. And then they opened up their borders for trade and for the flow of capital and for the flow of people. I think here we really need to look at collective security measures. I really think that when we look at the Arab countries, oil producing and non-oil producing, rich ones and poorer ones, I think there is a collective security for the Arab countries as a whole. And I think that when we speak about grants, it is not essentially just out of political favor. I think it's a collective security measure for all the Arab countries. I wonder sometimes that had the Arab world gone through all the measures and had it implemented all the actual resolutions of the Arab Summit when Amr Moussa was there, and speaking about Arab unity and collective Arab markets and the Arab Free Area agreements, I'm not sure we would have seen the Arab Spring in Tunis or anywhere else. I think that the reality of the Arab world would have been much, much more different today. I'm not sure Yemen would be today what it is had there been a serious investment in the economy of Yemen and for many, many years to come. So I think that when we speak about the collective Arab security, we really need to look at the economic component of it. But the second point I want to mention is that today we really have to think not only about governments and about grants. Because I remember in the economic summit that President Sisi had in Sharm el-Sheikh, he came out and said, you know, if you think that $4 or $5 billion is going to help Egypt, you're wrong, because Egypt needs $200 to $300 billion. And that's the reality. Jordan needs more than $20 billion. Jordan is indebted today with more than $30 billion US. So you really need to have an effective Marshall Plan to graduate these countries out of what they are today into what you really want them to be. The private sector has an immense role. I think that we cannot really here just let the private sector getting away with this, because they have a serious role. I think people like Baha and people like Mohammed Al-Abbar and many others, and Cisco and John Chambers, have shown tremendous commitment to Jordan and a tremendous faith in Jordan's leadership and Jordan's people and Jordan's economy. But I think we need to see more than that. We need to look into a different paradigm altogether right now. There needs to be a new partnership that exists between the regional and the global private sector and governments. Governments have to be not short-sighted. They have to be really far-sighted in how they address the private sector, but also the countries, the foreign governments, the international financial institutions need to move beyond the conventional wisdom of the IMF and the World Bank and look at us in a different way. It's high time for that.
Okay, Sir Suma.